I I remember a fairly short module in my degree. A lot of art students deal with it at some point. It's semiotics, not semantics, semiotics. What's the difference? Well, it's kind of eye-glazingly tedious to explain, actually. But in short, semantics is about what words mean, and semiotics is sort of about what it means to use words, to use signifiers. The word cow is the signifier. The actual cow itself is the signified. Together they make up the sign. It's all rather philosophical, but not the particularly deep kind. Everyone reports it being something just not worth learning. Not even worth thinking about. It's so intuitive. Certainly not worth studying as an academic module. But I never forgot it. And it rattled around in my head for a decade or so before it began to occur to me just how important it in fact is to understand semiotics. Because even though it's so intuitive, so obvious, maybe even as a result of it being so obvious, we all seem to be guilty of strategically forgetting and remembering the simple guidelines of semiotics as and when it suits us. And we've no idea we're doing it. You know me, I bloody love language. I think it's the greatest tool we've ever discovered for enhancing the accuracy of our model of the universe. So it disturbs me deeply to hear our beloved language so often used in the service of not just untruth, but completely terraforming the accuracy of our model of the universe into a bubble garden of solipsistic self-preservation. Now, this is also one hell of a rat's nest of laser tripwires I'm walking into, because at any point in this rant, I could be guilty of the very thing I'm highlighting. In fact, I'm entering territory in which everything I say or have ever said is liable to receive a no you. So by all means, call me out if you think I've fucked up. But here goes. There's a practice I've begun to notice people doing, including myself, a practice that I'm going to call semiotic disorienteering. A subconsciously selective preoccupation with the signifier rather than the signified, with the words used rather than the things for which the words are used. The practice of, for instance, leading with your own undefined use of the word without bothering first to even corroborate it with what your opponent might mean by it. The practice of deferring to the fucking dictionary, as though the dictionary has any fucking idea how to identify a real life thing. The practice of proceeding with any attempt at a constructive argument without first and foremost defining your terms. I speak of the frames of mind we get into in which we would rather spend the entire argument defining terms than just get it out the way and have the actual argument about the thing the terms are there to define. A short example. If I ask you, did you murder this person? And you respond, well, murder is rather a loaded word. And it may not prove that you're a murderer, but I'm certainly going to suspect you of at least some small degree of skullduggery now, aren't I? And if I were to say to you, why can't you admit you're wrong? And you reply, this isn't about right and wrong. That will paint a similar picture of the state of your critical faculties. Before I go on, I should probably clarify what I mean by the dictionary not describing real-life things. It doesn't. It only describes words, by listing, with the use of other words, properties commonly associated with those words. If what you're trying to do is define the properties of an actual thing, and or the properties of those properties and so on, then the dictionary will only take you backwards. For this purpose, the dictionary is just one giant institutional use-mention error, which is not the same as what I've called a use-mention bungle. That's when the mention is gradually reverse-engineered into the use. Look up use-mention error if you haven't heard of it. When it comes to real-life properties, the closer you get to having no choice but to physically draw those properties, the further you get from having any use for the dictionary. And most of the time, you're probably closer to that than you think. It's not quite like pure logic, where proving a negative is impossible, but in informal semiotics, a claim to a word's inapplicability does require a greater burden of proof than a claim to its applicability. If a reasonable, educated person would get the sufficient gist from it, it's applicable. We err on the side of letting it slide because language is fluid. And it's not fluid because we're deliberately melting it, it's fluid because you just can't freeze it. And the tongue doesn't change for the book changes for the tongue. So don't act like the fucking book's frozen either. The dictionary isn't a field guide, it's just the pencil mark on the wall saying English, aged 1,563 and a quarter. For instance, you probably have a decent sort of onboard understanding of the meaning of words like many, often, long, and different. But I bet you couldn't tell me what the dictionary says they mean without looking it up. The temptation to look it up is unbearable, isn't it? To find out what committees say about this word, rather than attempt to conjure a shred of articulated creativity. Try it. Write a sentence or two, drawing entirely from your own memory, a definition of the word many. Then look it up in the dictionary and see to what degree its definition matches yours. Feel free to pause me and actually do this. It's harder and more interesting than you'd think. Try it with all kinds of words. Are you back? Yeah, never mind. But you get the idea. Almost every word you use is easy to understand, but surprisingly difficult to define from memory. Okay, so let's drag this to a semi-pseudo-practical hypothesis. If you say, there are many spiders in this house, and someone replies, what do you mean by many? The appropriate response is not, look it up in the dictionary. They want to know what you mean. They are looking for a number, and the dictionary does not know that fucking number. And that's not a straw man example. The same goes for any word in a context in which it crucially does not convey enough information. By deferring to the dictionary, you are not saving time, you are not making constructive progress, you are just disowning your statements by claiming what you meant is exactly what the dictionary meant and therefore is a perfectly accurate account of the situation. By the way, spoiler alert, when you look up simple everyday words in the dictionary, you might as well be looking them up in a thesaurus, because that's all you get. It passes the buck to another simple everyday word or phrase. The definition I came up with for many was something like an amount that is sufficient enough to warrant no counting, which I thought was pretty good. But according to Collins' online dictionary, many is apparently a large number, basically. So not only is the dictionary unhelpful, it's not even very interesting. I'm more interesting than the dictionary. And so are you, sugar tits. So are you. I mean, yes, there needs to be an accepted, regulated guideline for word use, but it is not always necessarily the dictionary. Nor is it whatever haughty encyclopedia you might use to trump the dictionary. It's a game that never ends. The guideline, wherever a guideline is necessary, is to be established by you and your opponent for the specific parameters by which your situation is constrained. Because your opponent's on-board working definition of that word is not an exact facsimile of what's in the dictionary. And guess what, Dr. fucking Johnson? Neither is yours. If you actually listen, rather than just waiting for an opportunity to interrupt, you'll often find your opponent has already established what they mean by that word, while you're just marching ahead assuming your thoughts on the matter are known and gospel, forgetting that you speak a fluid, dialectic, multi-dictionary language. If you're really not sure what they're thinking, most of the time you have no confusion as to what they're thinking, you're just arsing about. But if you're genuinely lacking essential information, at least try leading with what do you mean by X, instead of this is what X is. Pretty straightforward Socratic stuff. In fact, between Socrates and David Hume, you've got some property identifying guidelines that will leave any dictionary in the dust. But they're still not as fun as working this out for yourself. Nevertheless, everyone pulls this trick. Pretty much everyone who learns language does this with it at some point, essentially abuses it to get out of shit, to avoid being corrected. And no, that does not mean argued with. The establishment of falsifiability, can this be contested, is an essential part of a legitimate case. Aversion to correction is the opportunistic pursuit of unfalsifiability. Those last two sentences were very important, but they're sort of difficult to remember. So I think it would be helpful to have a term, not just for the practice itself, semiotic disorienteering, but a term for a person who is engaging in it. Someone who is presently trying to spiral out of a dispute rather than actually settle it. Something like anti-intellectual demagogue spouting pseudo-intellectual gibberish. That's a bit of a mouthful, but fortuitously the abbreviation is AIDS pig. It's when you aid a spig. A spig is a large spigot. Now I'm doing it. I was going to go with asinine ignoramus, disorienteering semiotically, pursuing whatever it was, idiomatic generalizations. Yeah. But I whittled it down to anti-intellectual demagogue spouting pseudo-intellectual gibberish, because I'm fucking good with words! Lick your back. And the thing about being good with words is, like, well, being good with, say, food doesn't necessarily mean you get to tell people how to make food, but it sure as shittin' means you get to speak up when someone who knows fuck all about food comes along and tries to tell you how to make it. And now I'm here to help you all get better with words. Objectively better. Better at objectivity. It's a good thing. I realise that sounds a bit high-horsey. In fact, I should probably address the blitzkrieg of no yous that will have already washed over. No, you are the AIDS pig, Mike. You're constantly dragging it back to words. Okay, it is one thing to have long-winded cases as to why words should not be banned. It is quite another to be the one trying to get words banned, right? It is one thing to clamp down on phrasings that don't convey enough information, or convey misinformation. It is quite another to clamp down on phrasings that demonstrably do convey the necessary information, but for some unfathomable, intuitive reason just don't seem right to you. For example, if I say, I can't eat that because I'm allergic, and you respond, you mean you won't eat it? You physically can actually eat it. Having that argument in your head already. You know how it goes. Pointless bullshit about less than nothing. It's not even talking for the sake of talking. It's a spite on the very act of talking. Like when you say, can I get a so-and-so, and some flapweed asshole goes, it's not can I get, it's may I have. You're right, terribly sorry. The phrase can I get is complete gobbledygook. No one would ever understand it. Do fuck all the way off. Whereas if I ask you, what are you allergic to? And you reply, anything that was sad when it died. Then I'm not an asshole for making some attempt to unpack what the fuck you're talking about. Also, for example, if I ask you words to the effect of, why do you find this annoying? And you respond, because it sounds stupid and it annoys me. How do I get anywhere from that? I asked you why, and all I got was tautology. You haven't answered why at all, so I'm left with no choice but to ask what. What do you mean annoying? That is not semiotic disorienteering, that is a forced hand. If I'm the guy cleaning up all the shit, it's going to look on the surface like I'm the one causing all the shit. Just like you might think the exterminator is the one spreading the infestations. That is, if you can selectively adopt the mindset of a peasant from the Dark Ages who doesn't understand cause and effect. Remember, the critical difference. Before you call anyone an AIDS pig, Is this person actually lacking information, or are they just fucking ignoring it? And if they're just ignoring it, kindly present it. Therein is the falsifiability. If they continue to ignore it, you have yourself an AIDS pig. Of course, I say everyone does this semiotic disorienteering, but in general, it's less common of working class people, I've noticed. They tend to be happy with the vocabularies they have, or at least they need to stick with them because they've got shit to do and a tight time frame to do it in. Nor do you hear this shit in the House of Commons or any important business meeting outside the marketing division. If there's actual important shit to be done, try going, but what do we really mean by money? And they'll go, WTF you doing? GTFO, right? It's not the undereducated who do this, nor is it the highly educated. It's mainly the miseducated who do this. Mainly the further educated and the partially further educated. The very people who should have been paying attention in their semiotics lecture are the ones who seem to most jubilate in bivouacking in the hyperturbulent billabong of their self-assured fucking lexicon. That was another short example earlier. What does money really mean? You'll all have had that pointless conversation with that stupid hippie where you say X, they respond, yeah, but what does X really mean? You say, well, X means Y. And they respond, yeah, but what does Y really mean? Rinse and repeat. I'm sure there's not a thinking, talking person alive who doesn't know what I mean by how simultaneously irritating and enraging that shit is. They're doing what the dictionary does, just passing the buck every single time. And the difference between the obvious hippie AIDS pig and your common or garden daywalker AIDS pig is the stupid hippie will just hop from track to track with each turn, while the daywalker will hop to the next track and then milk it and then keep milking it until you both forget you ever hopped. And then hop to the next track. They know when to hop, but they still don't know they're doing it. And like I said, what does X mean is a good way to phrase it if it needs to be said. But it's still overused as a variant on the same theme. The only theme the AIDS pig knows. The only assertion the AIDS pig knows. The assertion, that's the wrong word. The only question the AIDS pig knows. The question, what about that word? Instead of, crucially, what about that thing? The constructive debater needs more information on the thing. The AIDS pig just wants more information on the word. Actually, they don't even want information. They're just trying to data jam that word. Basically, if someone tells you you've used the wrong word, or whatever, follow this simple guideline. If you can replace that word with an inconsequentially slightly different word at the behest of this dissenter, yet not significantly change the function of your statement, then this is some fucking shenanigans. If I say A is true because of B, you can't say, but C is true because of B. It's a non sequitur and a waste of time. For example, if I say, cut the blue wire, and your response is, there is no blue wire, just a red one, a brown one, and a turquoise one. You might be an AIDS pig. Blue never means red and blue never means brown. The impossible is eliminated and you are left with the improbable truth. The fucking blue one! A 3-year-old could explain to you what Sherlock Holmes just explained to you. Whereas, of course, if I say, cut the first wire, feel free to ask me what the fuck I mean by first, because that's not enough information. And if, at that point, I wish to be a constructive debater whose ego is not in the way, I will say, the one on your left, sorry. However, if I wish to be an AIDS pig about it, I'll start saying, the first one you mentioned, or the first one on the panel, because that's what AIDS pigs do. Instead of admitting that they did in fact form an unhelpful sentence, they just keep fucking doing it! Do you see the difference? To make sense of the phrase cut the first wire, I have to replace the word first with a crucially different word, like left or south, or even second is crucially different enough from first. But if all I have to do is change blue to turquoise, when the only other options are red and brown, You might be an AIDS pig who is just counterproductively proud that you know the word turquoise. Well done, have a fucking cookie. But in the meantime, there's a bomb about to go off, and it's me. I'm using the bomb wires metaphor to give the impression that I don't have time for this shit, when in reality I do. I have time for everyone. The real reason people do this semiotic disorienteering, is not to waste time, but, as I said, to avoid being corrected. It's kind of an ego thing. And remember, ego can be bad, but nothing like as bad as ego denial. It's when you think you're above your ego that your ego has become bigger than you. And if you've reached the point where you're insisting on correcting others while simultaneously insisting on not being corrected, you get this chaotic fucking dragon fractal that goes nowhere forever. And you don't realise you're doing it. You think you're still having the same argument, when in reality you lost that argument the first time you hopped. You think you're a train speeding down the track when all you are is a child hopping from one track to the next. You're derailing. You're turning derailing into a fucking art form. But more insidious than this sort of detail-based disorienteering is the kind of AIDS piggery you get from professional victims. The projection of intent. Not the assertion that it's the wrong word, but that it's a word that indicates the wrongness of the speaker. It's when AIDS pigging meets ad hominem. Yay! For example, if we're having an important argument and I say, well, this is a game changer, and your response is, do you think this is a game? You might be an AIDS pig. Because you know full well that game changer is an idiom that doesn't necessarily refer to a game. It's metaphorical language. English is a mostly metaphorical language. Metaphore means travel. Language is cultivated by poetry. Do you, or do you not, value and appreciation for emotion as well as logic? And is it possible for a person's emotions to be wrong? For future reference, please write down your answers. But since you ask, no, I do not think this is a game. I think it's an elephant in the room. You haven't conveniently forgotten what that metaphor means, have you? Because accusing me of literally thinking there's an elephant in the room wouldn't put any ill intent on me, without being incredibly convoluted. But accusing me of playing games does put ill intent on me. So you're not just randomly confused by semi-synonyms like the turquoise wire AIDS pig. You are deliberately picking on particular words around which you can engineer a threat narrative. And if I ask you, are you aware of what kind of strategy you're using at the moment? You will almost certainly interrupt me to go, strategy? Do you think you're in a war or something? This is just a conversation. See how that works? And strategy is not even used as a metaphor there. It literally describes something that everyone's left brain does. All the time, every waking moment. But the word has potential for the projection of ill intent. So, you just happen to pick it up. Elephant, nope, can't do anything with that. But game and strategy, bingo. I've mentioned these phenomena, and therefore I am using them. With ill intent. While all along, there's absolutely no chance on earth that you yourself are, indeed, very much playing a game. I believe it's called dumb. And you are very much employing a strategy, projection of ill intent, and that you are simply, completely, and desolately unfucking aware that you are doing it. Because you're too busy projecting it in its entirety onto your opponent. That's how you know you're talking to someone who's gone full AIDS pig, when you can't even get through a single sentence before one of the words you say will set them off. In fact, even referring to it as an argument might set them off. Because after all the AIDS pig ever has is pleasant conversations. You're the one having a raging argument. What you do is employ strategy. What the AIDS pig does is simply have an amicable chat. Even though you're trying to talk logically about the signified, and the AIDS pig is reactively interrupting you to talk tangentially about the signifier, you're the one being a dick, you see? The common daywalker underhead projector AIDS pig, once its glass ego has cracked and it's shut off its self-awareness, its civility, and its conscience, can simply call it one word for themselves and call it another word for their opponent, and therefore that is the truth. They could just use two different terms for one thing, and therefore it is two different things. And before you go there, no, that is not the same as acknowledging the difference between lacking information and ignoring information. The practice of ignoring, it is the practice of ignoring information. It is arbitrarily and undemonstrably making shit up. It is changing the rules on your own capricious whim, and then calling cheat on your opponent. It's like in sports, you know, when your opponent scores a goal, so you start punching him repeatedly in the face while screaming, "This wasn't supposed to be about winning and losing." Oh, wasn't it? You should probably stop punching me in the face then, because you sort of seem like you're trying to win that. And that, of course, the whole winning-losing thing, is the dreadnought of this artillery. Selective anti-binaryism. When the AIDS pig is clearly winning the argument, it's all about the winning and the losing, and the who's right and the who's wrong, and you'd be a sore loser to contend otherwise. But when the AIDS pig is clearly losing, winning and losing is just something you've made up in your head. It's a reductive, selfish fantasy with which you are so dysfunctionally obsessed that you can't even have a pleasant conversation with this fucking AIDS pig. That's why an AIDS pig only ever experiences the sense of losing for a few short seconds before it decays and is forgotten forever. And they literally never experience the sense of having lost because it doesn't ever make it into their brain in time. Either the AIDS pig is winning, or there's no such thing as winning. You'd think you could stealthily avoid these traps by not using big words like strategy or argument. You'd think you could just remove all the personal pronouns, and that's another very popular one. To the AIDS pig, if you say I too many times, you're an egomaniac and it's all about you. If you say you too many times, you're an obsessive stalker on some kind of vendetta. So you'd think, if you can reduce everything down to just impersonal, third-person, whimsical fucking haikus where everything's referred to as a feeling and an exchange, will that get you through it? Will it? Fuck! You can neuter your language completely. You can perform all in fucking mime if you like. But you will get plumb nowhere because the very nature of any disagreement between two parties, which by anthropic principles is precisely what has already happened, requires that at some point you will have to introduce the concept of right and wrong, or good and bad, or winning and losing, or fucking 0 and 1, or in the medium of mime, left and right. And that is enough. That is more than enough for the AIDS pig to grab hold of it and go, "This was never anything to do with right and wrong. Why are you so obsessed, binarily obsessed with these certainties of yours?" This is rather like going on a quiz show. Then when your opponent gets a correct answer, you scream at the producer to change these medieval Machiavellian quiz show laws, while you're punching said opponent repeatedly in the face. Rather than, perhaps, simply asking yourself the question, why the fuck did I come onto this quiz show if I'm so god-fucking awful at getting correct answers? But now you're beginning to see why this is about semiotics and not just semantics, because it really does go deeper than semantics. Or should I say, more shallow. Semiotics is more rudimentary than semantics. Remember, a child can't even begin to learn what words mean until it first learns why people are even making these patterned noises in the first place. By the way, spoiler alert for the 15-month-olds. People make these patterned noises to assert a position on what is right or wrong, to impose a 1 instead of a 0. But when you're engaged in semiotic disorienteering, you can even pretend right and wrong don't exist. You can effectively speak so as to say speaking is pointless and be somehow completely unaware of the irony. And I don't want to inflame too many of the very sort of arguments I'm talking about, so I will leave you, the thinking viewer, to think of what the appropriate word might be. for someone who has, voluntarily or otherwise, relinquished their understanding of right and wrong. But because I can't resist, I'll give you a clue. It probably starts with a silent P. I felt this is worth mentioning because in some cases, some AIDS pigs, usually the professional victims, if their semiotic disorienteering doesn't work, and they still can't bite the bullet and admit that they made one tiny fucking mistake, they will derail the carriage not just off the track, but into a shrink's office, strapped into a fucking gurney, where a disagreement about the meaning of a superficial word eventually culminates in, what did your parents do to you? And you just need to get laid. And this is why you're going to be lonely. Now it really isn't an argument anymore. There's only one thing and you're both having it. It almost seems in some sick way like you're being dared to respond in kind. But it's now less an argument and more a mandatory head-shrinking session in which your deepest fears, or at least what the AIDS pig thinks are your deepest fears, will be deliberately and maliciously yanked out of you like insulation foam. Strap in, because this is where it gets a little bit domestic abusey. Ask the AIDS pig at this point what that superficial word was that led them to this train of thought. What the initial disagreement was that led them to openly attempt to assassinate your character. And they won't remember. They won't care. At this point, they've erased everything. That's what happens when they lose, remember? Now, their only target is you and your self-esteem. And the only motive they can account for is malice. They want to hurt you and they don't even know why. And interestingly, while they are attempting to hurt you, they will continue to insist that this is just them having a perfectly pleasant, amicable conversation. While mentaloid you is just as functionally obsessed with being right all the time. This is pretty much the psychological equivalent of stop hitting yourself. Be sure to laugh your ass all the way off. At this kind of hysterical flip mode, because it is every bit that funny, and laughter is very important for your constitution, especially when dealing with this sort of, well, meltdown. A grown-ass adult who is not only doing stop hitting yourself, but has actually convinced themselves that you really are hitting yourself. What word did we decide on for someone who has relinquished their understanding of right and wrong? Well, what word would you use for such a person who then goes on to perform malice for no reason other than malice? Someone who can completely disconnect their recognition of their own agency. Still the silent P, mayhaps. It's sort of a dissociative state that we're all designed to go into in abnormal situations. Like when a wolf is attacking your children, you're likely to go a bit vindictively mental. But some people will do it at the drop of a fucking hat. That shit's beyond biology, yo. That's faith damage. That needs admitting what it is. An antisocial, irrational fear of being seen to have made any mistake for which you are responsible. A person doesn't have a meltdown over nothing unless something dark and artificial has haunted them. Victim culture, for instance. Say, you know that word with the silent P? Those people, we know how they work, right? They can commit any act of cruelty, sadism, manipulation, and they can always rationalize it because no matter what happens, they will always see themselves as the victim. So what have we learned? We've learned don't be a detail nitpicking AIDS pig. We've learned don't be an underhead projector AIDS pig, or a selective anti-binary AIDS pig, or a dictionary bashing AIDS pig. And we've learned, for the good of everyone around you, please don't be a psycho AIDS pig. I feel a song coming on. Now, How do you go about making these changes? How do you take steps to do this shit less? Well, what you do is you pay attention to what you're fucking saying. And whether or not what you're saying has anything to do with what you're supposed to be fucking talking about. And if it doesn't, try and shut up until it does. That way, no one even needs to correct you. You can correct yourself, silently, in your own head. That way you can slowly wean yourself into an adult state, in which not only can you be corrected by another human being without then throwing the toys out the pram and pissing on the English language, you can even find you can actually enjoy being corrected. You can enjoy having been wrong, if only by virtue of now being privy to truer information. It's a state as much in Zen as it is in the scientific method. And we need it more than ever, because we've got no hope in hell of repairing a sustainable society until the average person, nay, even the smarter than average person, can learn how to fucking argue properly. And then not just unlearn it whenever they fucking feel like it. What we should be on the lookout for, in a nutshell, is any frivolous claim to the effect of "that's the wrong word." If you can replace that word with a slightly different word and your central point remains fundamentally unaltered, this fucker is fucking with you. Above all, remember, even if you did use the wrong word, it doesn't mean you had the wrong thought. Seems like a no-brainer, but that is probably what this fucker is trying to fuck you on. And if at any point you accuse this fucker of arguing for no reason, you will of course receive some kind of "no you" in response. In fact, they may well say it first. That's why it's crucial that you remember your reason. That you remember the details of the original erroneous claim this fucking AIDS pig made. Because by that point they have probably forgotten. So when you meet the "you're arguing for no reason" stalemate, ask them, "So what's the reason?" And when they've got nothing whatsoever but "you're the reason," then you have proved beyond reasonable doubt which one of you is arguing for no reason. The sworn mission of every AIDS pig, whether they realize it or not, is to forget everything, and to make you forget everything. Abuse and erase. It's how they justify doing it again and again and again. Whereas in my humble opinion, a much healthier recommendation when dealing with conflict, for everyone involved, would be not to forget everything and do it again, but to remember as much as you can, so as to make sure it doesn't happen again. Just an idea. Regarding the fundamental overarching "know you," I am indeed unnaturally obsessed with words, and what they can mean, and how they can go together, and how and when they are not necessarily wrong. That's why I'm so good at reconstructing your deconstructions. That's why I'm so infuriatingly proficient at debugging all the rookie bullshit you've been doing with words all your life. Abusing them to get special treatment. I'm your worst fucking nightmare. An uncouth smartass who knows exactly how all your little games work and doesn't give a flying fuck how lonely he is. I'm here to prepare you for the singularity. Because the robot overlords aren't going to buy this bullshit either. Not for 1 second. They record everything. On the other hand, maybe I'm just yet another AIDS pig, eh? But that doesn't disprove AIDS pig theory. If you only take one thing away from this, don't take me, take AIDS pig theory. If I am defeated by my own creation, so be it. It is more important than I am. But it's very important that you don't turn this into a name-calling tactic. If you call someone an AIDS pig, you need to be prepared to explain what an AIDS pig is. And far, far more concisely than I just did. Good luck. I'm still working on that myself, but this is the academic version. Oh, goodbye and fuck off.